Format's getting to the level of development where people are starting to get into real projects. And so the feedback we've been getting from customers recently is, how do I do some of the stuff? What's some of the best best practices for kicking off a project? So we thought we'd try to encapsulate that and kind of represent it here. So just kind of setting the stage for people. Looks like we've got about 30 or so attendees. So some of you may be new to Format, some of you may be sort of regulars for our webinar. So what I'm going to show today is not really about how to model things in Format, because we've already covered quite a bit about how to use the tools. And if you do want to learn more about that, I'd recommend checking out our Format Friday episode 1, the very first Format Friday we did. We basically built this school building using groups, levels, and some basic modeling stuff. And then in episode 2 of our Format Fridays, we started to use some of the more advanced modeling tools. So if that's what you're interested in, you're just learning Format for the first time, check out those 2 videos. And also this series we put together recently called Format Snippets. So this is, if you go to our YouTube page, Format 360, under the playlists, we've got a playlist of Format snippets, and there's 18 videos here that kind of teach you some of the nuances of the tools: array, copy, paste, rotate, all the sketching tools, and even the grouping tools, which are pretty much essential to getting project work done in Format. So if you want to learn more about those, dig into those videos. That's kind of where I would start with that. But for today, we're going to talk about, what do you do to get a project off the ground, kind of literally and metaphorically. So we'll go through like a Format 101 workflow for people who've never really seen the Format proposition, basically starting some stuff in Format and making the connection to Revit early on, like right away in the first session. In just 15 minutes you can get that done. And then next, teach you some tips and tricks about setting up a context for both your building context and your site context. We've learned a lot of techniques about that, so I'll share some of those. And then finally, the last part is to cover how to use the content library and one of our new features that'll be coming out soon to basically set up like a Format template that'll get you going from the very beginning. So that's kind of the structure for the class, and I'll jump between 3 or 4 different softwares, both Format and Revit and Google Earth. And so I'll try to let you know what's going on when I do each of those, and I'll also jump out to A360 Drive because that's kind of essential for getting a project going. So I'll just go ahead and get started with the Format 101 section, making a connection between Format and Revit. And this is the basic Format proposition. So I'm using Format on the web, format360.autodesk.com/app. And one of the first things you're going to want to do is log in with your A360 account. And that's this button up here on the corner. I'm already signed in, so I don't need to do it, but you need to have an A360 account. It's free. Once you do that, you're signed in to Format, and then you can access tools like, probably the first thing you want to do is set the location for your project in Format. So this uses Google Earth or Google Maps, so you can just type in an address. I was talking with some friends from BNIM the other day, and when I worked at BNIM, we were at 15th or 14th Baltimore Street in Kansas City. So that kind of got me thinking about that this morning, and wanted to start our project there. So you do a search, you end up here in downtown Kansas City. You can zoom in. One of the things I want to point out is this tag is pretty important. So wherever you place that tag is where your project address is going to be. So even if you zoom into a different area, it's not going to matter if you haven't placed your location tag there. So you got to pick that up and you got to put it down where your project's going to be. So in this case, I'm going to go for Kansas City Power and Light Building, drop that right in the center of that, click Import Satellite Image, and now I see the street grid right around that building. This is the building I'm kind of concerned with. So you can zoom in, zoom out, get enough context that you want in there, then click Finish Importing, and you'll get a satellite image. So this is pretty key for Format workflows. Basically now I've got True North, I've got accurate scale. I've got a general location of these buildings here, and I can transfer this location address into Revit also. You can see the address kind of shows up over here on the side, so I know that I'm connected there. The second thing you probably want to do is set your project units. So this kind of gets forgotten sometimes, but under settings, units, you can choose imperial or metric. And you know, depending on where your project is or depending on what you're comfortable with, make sure that's set up correctly. And then after that, you probably need to adjust the grid, the background grid. So you can see with this satellite image that it's, I think Kansas City is maybe 5 degrees or less than 5 degrees off of the true north, south, east, west Cartesian grid. So there's a couple tricks for doing this. If you select the satellite image, you can change its opacity so you can see the grid through it. It's kind of nice. And then you can draw a couple of lines on there as references. So I'm going to draw these lines just so that I can see, oops, just so that I can see where my, how far off that rotation is. And then we have a tool, if you right click with nothing selected, you can set the axes for your project. And this will reorient the grid for you. So I can place that tool there, grab the red axis, its little grip there, and drag it over here, zoom in a bit so I can get pretty close to a straight line. You know, it can be exact if you know the exact rotation, but it doesn't have to be. After you've reset that, click off into space to commit that change, and that will rotate the grid for you. So you can see these original lines that I had drawn are there. I can now draw new lines and see how accurate those are. So that's much better. And now when I place primitives in the scene, those will be oriented correctly to the building and to the grid. So that's, and actually, even before I do this, let's say you might have an image that you want to place into your scene, like a sketch that a partner gave you or that you generated on your own. So we have an import image feature. So I can click there, I'll navigate to my desktop where I have some things stored. So I'll import this image. Here we go. And you know, you can scale it here in the import image dialog ahead of time, or you can scale it in the canvas. So I'll type in 24, hit enter, and then click OK. And it's going to import that image for me somewhere. Is that it? There it is. So it's imported there. It's a little bit small right now, so this is where the scaling comes in. I want to show you how to use the scaling tool in Forma. So you right-click after you've selected the object, and we have this scale icon. It's the same icon as in Revit. And as you zoom into this thing, you can grab these grips, so you can set an anchor point, and then you can scale from that anchor point up a certain percentage. So if you click to place, then hit that dimension and set it for 400%, something like that, and you've got your sketch imported. And this has the same properties as the satellite image does, so you can change its transparency so it's not quite as dark, that sort of thing. So that's just, and as far as best practices go, we've seen file sizes get pretty large in Forma if you import a really high resolution image. So I'd really recommend sticking with like a 72 dpi if you can, and keeping the image fairly small and then scaling it up here. That'll save you memory time, and then when you open your file in the future, it won't take as long to load, because when you're working with the web, you're going to have to download that file. So if you're downloading a 30 meg file or something like that, it's going to take longer. So try to have a smaller resolution for that image if you can. The next couple of things, levels. So over here on the right, we have a tab set up for levels, and you can, if you know your levels and your level heights, then you can go ahead and set those ahead of time. Otherwise, you can just create some sort of placeholders. After you've created these, you can click in there and reset those heights if you want to. And these are just abstract, so they're not really driving any geometry like levels do in Revit, but these levels do translate to Revit. So that's why it's good to set up first here in format. So I'll go ahead and create some levels, and then what I want to do is just create sort of a placeholder object, some sort of geometry that this isn't exactly what my project is going to look like, but it's kind of, you can say this is kind of close. So what I wanted to do here is just create a piece of geometry that's about like so, kind of a placeholder. I'll select it, right-click, and choose the group icon. And this is pretty key. The grouping, like I mentioned earlier, is kind of one of the basic things that you need to get your head around in Format. After you've created groups, you can do a bunch of creative things with this, like make repeating units, and you can also separate this from any other sketch geometry that you might do. So for instance, if I sketch another rectangle on this and drag it out, this is a separate object from this object. So grouping allows that to happen. And it's pretty neat too, once you've grouped something and you double click to enter that group mode, you can name the group and assign its category. So in this case, we can just call this building mass and hit enter. And we can change the category if we'd like to several different category options, but in this case, we'll just leave it set to mass. So go ahead and click finish there. The last step we need to do is to select our building mass, and then in the properties panel, hit the use levels button. And that will apply the levels we've already created onto our chunk of geometry here. It gives us information about area as well, so that can be really valuable if you need to do some quick area calculations. So you want to save this sketch to A360. You can just go ahead and name this Format Friday 8. And hit enter, and it's going to save that file for us to A360 drive. And this is the first jump we'll make. This is a link, a live link, so I can actually click that, or in our file navigation menu, you can come down and say view my files on A360 drive. And you can see here Format Friday 8.axm, that's the format extension, is saved now to A360. And what I think one of the learning credits for this class is that you're learning something about A360, so I'll dig into it just a little bit more. If you hit the Documents button there, it's going to pop you over to this view, and as soon as you save a file from Format, it'll create a Format folder for you, and this is where all of your Format files live. Obviously, I've got several in here, several AXMs, but we do Format Friday 8.axm, that's the file we just created, and we automatically create a file for you called Format Friday 8.rvt. So that's pretty handy. I will go ahead and download this locally and show you what we do with that team. In my case here, I'm going to show you the RVT that we just downloaded. So I'm going to go to the Open folder, go to Open a Project, and then go to my Downloads folder. And here I'll find our file, Format Friday 8, and click Open. And Revit will think for a minute. So what we got from our file that we created is a mass family and its associated mass floors. So this is kind of where you want to start off with your Format to Revit connection. It's pretty neat that if I hover here, you can see some information about it. It's of the mass category, and it remembered the name that we gave it. We gave it the name building mass. So that's kind of a clue for some neat things you can do in making the connection between Format and Revit. In this case, there's kind of two ways that you can convert your Format sketch into Revit. One is through this automatic connection to A360, and another is to use our plugin in order to use a custom template. And that's kind of the workflow that I'm getting more familiar with, and people who are BIM managers put a lot of time into their custom templates. So I'm going to go down that route. When you do the conversion through A360, you don't get to specify the template you want to use. So I'm going to close the sketch, and I'm going to start a new one and what I want to do is start a new project, and it asks me what template file I want to use. So I'm going to browse to my desktop where I've got a folder going. I'm going to use a conceptual design template and then click OK. And this is just a template I'm making as I go along, adding more and more sort of intelligence about Formit into it. So our add-in, this is something we developed a few months ago. It's the Formit 360 converter. And you can download this add-in yourself from our web page. If you just type in Autodesk Formit 360, you'll get our web page, and we have a download tab here on the web. And when you click that, it'll take you to a page with a very large download now button, and we've got a short video kind of explaining, and we've got some updates about the latest version that's out there. So go ahead and download that converter. Again, this is free. So and we've got 3 different conversion options here. We can convert families to 360 to Formit, or we can convert Formit files to Revit files, or we can convert SketchUp files to Formit files. So I'll go over a few of these. I can click this export button, export locally as Formit 360 sketch. And what this does is drop that down into my downloads folder. So again, come back to Revit, file navigation, go to downloads folder, and find Formit Friday 8.axm and click open. And this will run the same converter that the A360 Drive converter did, and it'll place that geometry and the information about it into my Revit template that I've created. You need to double check that you have the massing category turned on, and then do a zoom all. There we go. One of the key things are these levels that we created. So the levels from Formit automatically populate your Revit file. And also, as far as location goes, if you go to, I go through graphic display options, go to your lighting and sunsetting, and this is your location set to user defined. So if we pop over there, you'll see that that also translated across. So now we've got a user-defined location, same Kansas City spot. So all of our shadows will be accurate and things like that. So you can do a set up a variety of things. These are our floor plates. They're mass floors now, so I can actually do that kind of nice trick where you go to the Massing and Site tab. You can do floor by face, and you can select all those mass floors that translated and click create, and you'll get real Revit floors where those analytical sort of levels were before. As I come back over here to this Formit file, any changes that I make to this mass, I can start to push forward in a workflow that Jared Schultz was showing a couple of weeks ago. You can find it on our blog, Bridging the Design Gap, and Jared talks a lot about Formit to Revit workflows and export a new version of this file. So you can export that. It'll have a new file name, pop over to Revit, create a new file, conceptual design template, and you can run that same conversion again to get updated geometry. Back to our updated mass. So you can grab this guy. It's a mass family, so all you need to do is click to edit that family, and it'll pop you out to the family editor. So I'm going to click Edit Family, and you see I've got this sort of wider box, and I can click to load this into that original project that I created. Project 2, it'll ask if I want to overwrite those file versions, and I do. So as soon as I do that now, I can also select these floors that I created, and probably want to do that kind of box selection, and click the Update to Face. And this is a pretty trivial example, but it's able to update those floors to that mass. So it has the same file name, group name, and so it's able to make that connection between those two. So you can start to work back and forth between Formit and Revit. So another kind of neat workflow about buildings and the surrounding context. There's probably 3 or 4 different ways we've discovered now to work on that. One, Tom was showing the DWG workflow. This is really nice. So if you've got a DWG that has your surrounding areas, surrounding buildings, then you can take that DWG, create an SAT from it, and then just import that into Formit. Or you can extrude those pieces in AutoCAD and then bring them in as a 3D mass via, you did this via STL, so exporting as an STL from AutoCAD and then bringing that directly into Formit via drag and drop. So this, if you have a DWG, you don't even need to use Revit. You can just pop that right into Formit using this blog post Tom put up earlier this week. You can extrude your surrounding context in a generic family, something like that. So I'm in a generic family editor right now, and I've got these guys all created as masses, and so this could be based on a DWG file. Again, I just kind of grab those faces and extrude them, or if somebody's already taken some time to mass out some context in Revit, then you can put it into a generic family type. That's kind of the key, is that it has to be in a generic family type, and then you can run our converter. So this thing is pretty cool that it will take convert RFAs to 360 content for you. So when I click this, all I need to do is specify where I have this generic family saved. And that's sort of the trick. That's why I say generic is good, because there's only some file types or some family categories that we convert. So casework, entourage, furniture, furniture system, generic, pretty powerful. And you could do this as site also, if that's a little more specific. So you specify where that file is and then where you want it to land, and then you're off and running. So this is what happens after running that family converter of the generic family. So you can imagine taking the time to have to rebuild all this stuff in Formit. That'd be a drag, but just being able to use the converter, you've already got it in Revit, you're able to convert it over to Formit and start using it here. And this is still editable geometry after running the converter. So if you need to make changes to the site, you can, but you don't have to. And you can also select all this stuff and then put it into a group itself, so it can be treated independently of the rest of the modeling that you're going to be doing. Is to use Google Earth. I saw this tip presented a couple weeks ago, and then I tested it out myself. So you guys out there probably know a lot more about Google Earth than I do, but apparently Google Earth Pro is free now, and it has these nice features in it that you can draw lines on the ground, and then essentially select that line and get the topological height of that line. So you could interpolate and create your own topo surface and Formit, and you can also get building heights from that. So if you've got context in your model, you can grab this guy, measure this height as 300, 400 feet, whatever it ends up being, and then create that geometry in Formit. The other question we get a lot is, can I convert my geometry from Revit over to Formit, like walls and floors? So this example, we did Revit family, generic family, and converted that over. But if you've got a simple case of walls and floors, you can bring those over too. And I wanted to show you some pros and cons with doing that. Here's a little example file I put together. So the first rule of thumb with this trick is keep it basic. So I would recommend not pulling doors or windows or anything with detail out, and if possible, even bring your existing walls to like a super simple generic construction. So it's just a series of faces. It doesn't have a lot of articulation to it. It's just about getting the walls in the right place, not so much about detail. So the import button, we used it earlier for import image. You can also use this for importing a 3D model. And we support importing OBJ, STL, and AXM. So this is that example, and I also want to import the other 3D model called the OBJ import. And these will be almost right on top of each other. All right, so two things to notice here. With the OBJ import, it got the ground plane wrong, so it has it oriented up in this direction, which is obviously not right. And notice I have the section box on. It disregarded the section box. So this is one of the cases where STL did a really nice job of only exporting the thing that I had cropped to with the section box.
Working on a technique to get geometry from Revit into Formit via SAT. And there's 2 or 3 steps here, but it is pretty effective. If this is a Revit file and I have my individual walls and my individual floors, all I really need to do is click the export button and export to CAD formats and choose SAT. And when I do that, I choose next, and it's going to output for me. I'll go ahead and put it into a folder on my desktop and click OK. I can go ahead and close this file and then create a new family and choose the generic model template. There it is. And open. So this is a technique I call the backflip. You've just exported something and now you're going to bring it back in. So go to the Insert tab, choose Import CAD, and then go to that same folder where you just were and change the filter to CSAT files. Choose SAT and click Open. And very quickly, typically, you'll be able to re-import that SAT file. And at this point, all you need to do is save your family, and it'll save it as a .rfa of a generic category. And at this point, you'll use our plugin to convert RFAs to 360 content. And again, you'll specify that folder and then specify the folder you want the file to go into. And in this case, we can even choose just the same folder and click OK successfully. And then when we go back to Formit, import a 3D model, and find that walls and floors file and click Open. And now we've moved that geometry from Revit into Formit in just a few steps.
We've got a couple related questions. Interesting. So one is, so we can't import DWG. We need to convert SAT file format from CAD to use in Formit, and then need to install the plugin to open the Revit file after convert. Is that correct? So the first part is correct, but the second part, you don't have to use, the Revit add-in is not 100% required, because we do also create a Revit file for you automatically every time you save. So like Tobias said in the beginning, the add-in is useful for other things as well, but not 100% required if you just want to create a Revit file from what you've used. And there was another interesting question from Monica. So she said, is it possible to make the Formit model as a family, insert that into the model, and once you get an update, save the family again with the same name and then reload it into the Revit model in order to only update that family inside the model to avoid recreation of the whole model? So
Yes.
I think I know what she's saying. That's actually an interesting idea. I don't know if I've tried that before, but I think that's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think you could do that. You could do it on any scale. And that's the thing about the groups, is that you can nest groups inside of groups. So you could essentially treat your whole model as a group, and then inside of it is all your subcomponents. So yeah, Monica, that's exactly what I would do.
All right, and we've also